All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about Robert Cialdini's principles of influence today, but probably not in the way you're used to hearing about them. We're going to dig into the hidden story.
Look, if you've spent any time in marketing or sales, or even just picked up a business book, you know these. These are the big six, right? They're always sold to us as these fundamental shortcuts to persuasion, the undisputed rules of the game. You've got reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. They sound simple, powerful, and just super effective.
But what if that's not the whole picture? What if the story we've all been told, these so-called universal laws that we've all memorized and built entire strategies on, what if they're based on a huge misunderstanding of what Cialdini was actually saying? So to really get what went wrong, we first have to understand why these ideas got so popular in the first place. You got to look at the world they were born into.
You see, Cialdini's book Influence didn't just show up out of nowhere. It hit the scene in 1984, right in the middle of a perfect storm. Think about it. TV advertising was getting super sophisticated, direct mail was blowing up, and people were generally kind of anxious about propaganda and being manipulated. And into all of this, you have businesses that are just starving for a scientific edge. They wanted real, usable knowledge from psychology that they could put to work.
And here's what made his work so different. Cialdini wasn't your typical psychologist in a lab coat, running controlled experiments. He was more like a social anthropologist. He actually went out into the field.
He went undercover. He spent time observing the real masters of persuasion, salespeople, fundraisers, even religious recruiters, and those multi-level marketing schemes. So he wasn't just testing some abstract theory. He was watching what was already working in the real world. And that's exactly why his findings felt so practical and why everyone jumped on them immediately.
And this is the best part. The irony is just perfect. The principles themselves became popular because of one of the principles. It was social proof. Basically, everyone started using them, so everyone else figured, hey, they must be true. The theory's popularity was literally fueled by one of its own ideas. You can't make this stuff up.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, if these ideas were based on real-world observation and everyone accepted them, what's the big deal? Where did the story go wrong? Well, it turns out there were three huge distortions that happened when the theory was packaged up and sold to the masses.
First up, there's the myth that these principles are universal, that they're just these psychological buttons you can push on anyone, anywhere, and get the same result. But that's just not true. A ton of later research showed that their effect changes dramatically depending on culture. For example, social proof? Way more powerful in collectivist cultures than individualistic ones. Context and culture matter a lot.
Second problem, the classic mix-up between correlation and causation. The simple story we're told is, oh, that limited edition sneaker sold out because it was scarce. But hang on, is that really what happened? Or was the sneaker made scarce on purpose to help it sell? See the difference? The scarcity didn't cause the success. The desire for success caused the company to create scarcity.
And this right here, this is probably the biggest distortion of all. Cialdini's original work was a description. He was just observing and saying, hey, this is a tendency in how people often behave. But that's not how it was sold. It got turned into a manipulative playbook. It went from here's how people are to here's the button you push to make people do what you want. And this shift from a description to a manual had huge consequences. It created this legacy that's like a double-edged sword, or maybe more like a shield and a sword.
See, Cialdini's whole point, what he said he wanted to do, was to give people a shield. He wanted to arm you and me with the knowledge to recognize and resist when we're being manipulated. And hey, on some level, it worked. It sparked some really important conversations about marketing ethics. But for the most part, it got picked up and used as a sword. It led to this widespread worship of psychological hacks, which started turning human relationships into simple transactions. It promoted a really cynical way of seeing other people.
And that cynical worldview is captured perfectly by this quote. People are not beings to be understood, but devices that move on reflex. Wow. I mean, just think about that. That's the dark side of twisting these ideas. It just reduces the beautiful, messy complexity of human beings into a simple machine you can program.
Okay, so we've seen the history, we've seen where things went off the rails. So what's the real takeaway? How should we, actually think about these famous principles today?
Well, today the experts pretty much agree. We shouldn't see these principles as ironclad laws of psychology. The better word is heuristics. And a heuristic is just a mental shortcut, a rule of thumb.
It's something our brains use to make decisions quickly without having to analyze everything. They're useful for understanding tendencies, for sure, but they are absolutely not universal buttons that control how people behave.
So let's be super clear. The principles aren't lies. There's definitely some truth to them, but they are huge oversimplifications. The real decider, the thing that determines if any of them will actually work in a given moment, is always context. The culture, the person, the specific situation, that's the crucial nuance that got totally lost when these ideas went viral.
And that leads us to the final and maybe most important takeaway of all. There's this quote, "When psychology goes viral, the desire of those who want to use it is always mixed in." Just let that sink in. The reason Cialdini's ideas blew up the way they did, it probably tells us less about some universal truth of human nature and a whole lot more about our own desire to influence each other. So the next time you come across some new popular psychological hack, maybe the first question you should ask yourself isn't, "Is this true?" but rather, who exactly benefits from me believing that it is?